In this episode of Faithfully Podcast, managing editor and host Nicola A. Menzie talks with Pastor Keion Henderson about themes related to his latest book, Lazy Love, Recognizing and Reversing the 4 Threats to Any Successful Relationship. Henderson is the founder, CEO, and senior pastor of the Lighthouse Church, a fast-growing megachurch based in Houston, Texas. Henderson, in ministry for more than 2 decades, has grown the Lighthouse Church to more than 15,000 members. In the following discussion, the popular preacher comments on different aspects of love, the internal work necessary for a successful marriage, and his own personal challenges with remarrying. In this case, to Shaquille O'Neal's former wife, Shaunie Henderson. The conversation also touches on Cam Newton's remarks about his struggles with marriage, Kirk Franklin's views on the weaponization of marriage, Henderson's fundraising efforts, his viral hush moment, and much more. Let's listen in.
All right. So in Lazy Love, you say there are 4 threats to any successful relationship. And so of the 4, what do you think is perhaps the biggest threat, maybe across the board?
Ooh, see, if I say which one, that's favoritism. I just can't. Let me see. So we understand that there is lack of respect, lack of forgiveness, confusing sex with intimacy. So, oh my God, that's probably the only question I've been asked in the last month.
Okay, that was a bad first one then, right? I threw you right in the deep end.
It's a good one because I don't know if they are, if you can separate them. Like it would be like saying, which disease would you rather have? The one that gives you the inability to hear or see? Like I don't know which one of those I would choose. I do know that communication is the substratum of all relationships. So maybe we'll start there and say, if there is no effective communication, you're probably going to have an issue because you can't talk about what the other problems are, right? So let's start with communication. I can't tell you I feel rejected. I can't tell you that you're not showing up correctly for me. I can't tell you that this sex doesn't feel like intimacy. So I'll go on a limb and say communication.
All right, sounds good, sounds good. And so the second question is kind of like that, but looking at the 4 kinds of love you point out, right? Agape, phileo, storge, and eros. So which of these 4 kinds of love do you think maybe Christians tend to misunderstand or overlook?
Oh, absolutely, without equivocation, agape.
Really?
Agape love is the love that God has for us, right? It's that, and that love that we ought to have for our fellow man. And see, we live in a society where we'll have agape love until you cross us. We'll have agape love until I don't love you no more. We'll have agape love until we break up. The Bible says, how many times should we forgive? 70 times 7. It's not a mathematical equation. It simply means that every time I forgive, it's a result of every time I'm offended. But listen to this. This is what we found out in the book. I kind of coined a different term. It's not actually forgiveness. It's actually be forgiveness, which means that I have to forgive you before you offend me. See, the word forgive is like the forehead being out front. So if I forgive, then I have to forgive. I have to be forgive. I have to say, you know what? I am a forgiver. And, the old adage says, like, when you don't forgive somebody, it's like you drink the poison and you wait on them to die. It just doesn't happen. And so I would say that agape love is not only the most misunderstood, it's the most underutilized. Because if you'll just decide that you're going to love people no matter what, remember, you reap what you sow. You tend to get loved no matter what. So I think that is the most important love that's often overlooked and underutilized.
All right. All right. And of course, that's a bit easier said than done because it probably takes a bit of practice. You got to get through some offenses to develop that discipline, right?
Yeah, and that's why we wrote the book, so that you can do more and it'll be easier. When people say easier said than done, it's because they don't practice the done, right? So once you start practicing, it becomes easier. It's like somebody who doesn't know how to swim. And then you look at them and say, oh, I'm treading water for 30 minutes. It's easier said than done. Well, I can do it because I've done it. And see, if people can get to the do, they can get to the done. But if you stay with the say, you'll never get to the done.
All right. All right. Yeah, quite a tongue twister there, but we get you. We get you. Okay, so you also mentioned in Lazy Love, as everyone knows, and I believe the discussion was probably trending on Twitter recently. We have a high divorce rate in this country, right? And a lot of marriages end maybe like after 8 or 9 years, especially the younger you tend to get married. So you also talk about your experience with divorce, and how it made you pessimistic about getting married again initially. So what piece of advice do you give to others who have maybe written off marriage? Maybe they're formerly divorced and they're afraid, kind of like you were, of ending up in divorce again.
Yeah, that's a difficult thing to get people to a frame of mind because, we all have attachment styles. We love based on how we were raised. And it's amazing you said that statistic because I got divorced after 9 years. I didn't even know it was 8 or 9 years. I didn't even know it. And I was young. I was young when I got married. So you just taught me something. So I need to send you something for teaching me. But seriously, I think that what I would say to people is you don't start with your ideas about marriage. You just don't start there. The first relationship you got to have is the one with yourself. So for people who've written off marriage, then I ask the question, why have you written it off? Guaranteed it'll be traced to some trauma that they've either had or that they've witnessed somebody else have. So you've got to start with, all right, who are you taking your information from? How do you show up when you're hurting and when you're in pain? We can talk about marriage later because you shouldn't even be considering it until you know how to handle trauma. You shouldn't even be considering it until you know what? I'm ready to not be selfish anymore. You shouldn't even be considering it unless you and that person have had the same conversations about, do we start a family? Can we have male friends, female friends of the same sex? Do we need time apart? So there's a whole lot of conversations that need to happen before we start talking about marriage. And then lastly, I always say, if you do get married, make sure you marry somebody who has enough capacity to house who you will become. Because if you marry somebody who only has the capacity for who you are, you will eventually outgrow them or they will outgrow you.
Well, and it's interesting. You mentioned a couple words there related to my next question. You mentioned selfishness, and it's another discussion that was recently trending. It's involving Cam Newton. And he had a guest that you're familiar then. You caught wind of that. All right. So here we go then, right? He had a conversation on his show with the psychologist. And he admitted to her, he has 8 children with 3 different women and he wants more kids. But he says here his desire to get married is lower than his fear of divorce. And his guest, Dr. Cheyenne Bryant, described his actions as selfish.
Hmm.
Um, and his situation could be also a bit different because he's a high profile person and athlete. But I believe he was brought up in a two-parent household, stable, and they're still married. So a lot of people were questioning, that trauma can't be there. So what's your take on that tidbit, that clip that we've all seen?
Yeah, and his trauma doesn't have to be based on his parents' relationship. It could be based on the ins and outs that he's been through. You just imagine being a world-class athlete and having to wonder who really wants me or do they want what I have? I mean, just imagine going through life with millions of dollars, recognizable everywhere you go, and having to really cipher through, does this person want me? So he's probably, and I don't know him, built some insecurities around what his outputs have been, what his encounters have been. So, because he didn't say that his parents were fearful, he said he was fearful. So even though he saw his parents stay together forever, he didn't grow up in his parents' house and didn't see the world. He saw that one good example, but he's online on television all day long, just like you're not hearing the news about another couple that got divorced, another high profile couple. So his trauma, I would assume, is based on his own experience. And, for him to have a perspective, that's why they're called opinions. We own them. We are allowed to have them, and it opens up discussions for us to find out The truth is really in between what I think and what you think. It's never really a composition of anybody's individual brain trust. So the truth is somewhere in the middle.
All right, all right. And let's see here. So another aspect of the marriage conversation, I guess we're sticking with that for a bit. So in the Christian church, and this was another topic brought up, I think, a couple of months ago by Kirk Franklin. Sorry to be just dropping these examples, but it's what people are talking about, right? That's what they're curious
Yeah,
about. So we
yeah.
speak into it. So he said in an interview that he, quote, believes that marriage has been weaponized in Western Christianity. And you were raised in the church.
Yeah.
So how do you see that? And I'm also curious, I mean, I think I might know the answer based on what you wrote in your book, but how do you see it? And also, did you feel any pressure at all during your singleness when going through your divorce and that relationship was over and done with? Did you feel a little pressure at all? Like people were looking or expecting, oh, is Pastor gonna get married again? Like, did you feel like you
Absolutely.
needed a first lady again on your arm?
Absolutely. Well, you asked two questions. Did I feel like I needed one and did they pressure me? Absolutely. I can't tell you how many times one of my sweet, we can't call them, we don't call our senior members old, we call them seasoned. So one of our sweet seasoned members will come over and say, you can't be out here single too long. And then the generation of people that would speak up had been married 30, 40, 50 years. And so, yes, there was immense pressure because I thought, this is me, I thought that getting married at that time was God's will for my life, and that as a pastor, I had to be married because they needed a first lady, and it's better to marry than to burn, and you can't be being promiscuous, and if you do that, you're sinning, and God's going to condemn you to hell. So I thought I was saving myself from hell by entering into a relationship. Never mind the fact that not going to hell has nothing to do with being married or not being married. And number two, I probably would have saved her and me a whole lot of hell had I got all of the work done on myself to be ready for marriage, to understand the difference between sex and intimacy, to understand how to be respectful when your feelings are hurt, to understand how to forgive and not be mad for 3 and 4 weeks at a time. See, those things are much more important than saying I do. You have to say I do to the process before you say I do to a person. I really believe that. And as far as is marriage being weaponized, I understood exactly what Kirk meant by that. And in fact, when he said it, I was interviewed by somebody else and they asked me the same question. And I called him and I told him what my response to that was. And here's the real question, because I mean, online, people just went in. Here's my real response to the question: whether marriage is being weaponized in the church or not. The question I want to ask America, or whoever will see this, is why we always fighting. That's the real, we fight about everything. Nobody can say anything. We argue about the argument. There is no tapestry for healthy conversation anymore. Everybody's so visceral and so violent. And so people are afraid to answer questions truthfully because it's a viral clip of which will be taken out of context. That's the real question. Why do we have to fight about everything? He was no more wrong than the person who believes they're right, and vice versa. He's no more right than the person who thinks he's wrong. We all have a right to our own outlooks, and then we should be able to smile and hug and have cheesecake afterwards and still be friends.
Yes, ideally, ideally.
Ideally.
So in your role as pastor, you just kind of mentioned that it involves guiding people through their personal and spiritual lives. And I imagine you've probably done some marriage counseling for other couples in your church. So how has your personal experiences, or should I say professional experiences, maybe ministering to others about what the Bible prescribes and envisions for their relationship with God and other people, how has that personally shaped your views on love and relationships? You're giving to these couples, but are you also picking up things that you feel like could
Yeah,
apply to yourself?
absolutely. I always say that the person who's learning the most is the person who's doing the teaching. And so I'm learning from them. But I learned a lot about myself. Sometimes I'm in a marriage counseling session and I listen to their problems, and then I have to say, hold on, let me raise my hand. I'm getting ready to say something that I'm not good at. That's why you came. I'm getting ready to say something that I learned, but I haven't perfected. It makes it difficult. That's what I've learned in this. You got to be careful about where you give advice because you don't know both sides of the story. You have to be careful when you tell a person what they better do or shouldn't do because you don't know the whole story. So I've learned to be very tempered in my responses. And I do more listening and counseling now that I'm older than I used to talk the whole time. You need to do this. And then I got to being a fool myself and realized, oh, you need to shut up because you didn't do that right. And so now I back off. I ask them where they are, and my advice becomes prevalent based on their set of circumstances and not as a smarty pants and the know-it-all.
That's wisdom, right?
Yeah, got to get it.
All right, so I watched a bit of your most recent Sunday night revival service this past Sunday at Lakewood Church. And near the end of the service, as you were making your way through the congregation there, you stopped with a young man and you ministered to him by telling him that you love him, and then you two also embraced. Why did you feel the need to do that in that moment? And what do you think the significance was of him hearing that and then getting that embrace? And, perhaps people seeing that too.
Yeah, so I've been preaching for 29 years. I've been pastoring for 21 years. So I have an instinct. I saw him need me. He looked me in the eye and I saw that it was almost like, please don't pass by me.
Mm.
So I stopped. With all those people around me and everybody's pulling me, they're talking about COVID and measles and all this stuff is out here. Yeah, but I've been doing it 30 years. The Lord has given me grace. And I'm not saying that I am, immune to anything because anybody, but when I'm doing my job, I think about me last. I just couldn't walk past him. That's a man. Men don't, he's crying. Like we did, we want to be he's crying. And he whispered to me and said, you the truth, man. And he started saying things like, no man has ever told me he loved me. And I've never been hugged by a man. I heard him say it. Well, I ain't got no other choice. Because you're not going to leave my presence with something I can do. And it's not going to cost me anything. I hugged him. I wouldn't care what anybody had to say about that. I promise you. He was helped. He was helped. And I hugged him and I told him I loved him because he told me that he had never heard a man tell him he loved him. And so I think in our society, we got to get past that. We got to get past that. Whatever our phobias are, we got to get past that. If somebody needs love, you got to look beyond whatever you think about that person. And you got to be able to give them that because it is the least expensive thing you have that makes the biggest impact. And so I did it. I don't regret it. I hope that he still feels the hug right now. And I hope I see him again. I've never seen that man before a day in my life. I hope I get a chance to see him again. And I hope that it took away some of the fear. Because I'm a man that grew up without his father. And I can tell you how many nights I went to bed with no hug. And I can tell you how many times I didn't hear my biological father say, son, I love you. I can see his face now and he's dead. And I wasn't going to leave that young man with that gaping void if I could do something to fill it. And I did it. And I hope, man, this first time I've been asked about it, I hope I helped him. That's all I can say.
Wow. Wow. All right. And yeah, so that was your last service at Lakewood Church because you announced you guys have one of your other facilities now that it's safe and you can return and you're going to start having services back at home. So congratulations on that.
Thank you. Thank you.
So talk about that a little bit. How did you get things? Because it's been about a month almost, right? How did you get things to just move?
That crew, and they're there now while I'm talking to you. because we have a school in that building, pre-K through fifth grade, and their school year couldn't start because the building, we had water coming in and the wind damage. And so when we started talking about what we would fix first, we made a decision that we would fix the school first, because we can go to church anywhere. But we felt like those kids needed a solid place to go. So they worked around the clock. I mean, they were working on the roof as early as they could get there in the morning and until the sun went down. They replaced the remediation, the fans and all of that to dry the building out. We had cleaning crews working at 3, 4 o'clock in the morning to get it. They're over there painting right now. They are cleaning chairs, getting ready. We even had to have a sound system put in, right? It's a gymnasium. So we put a sound system in, was over there last night to 10 o'clock at night doing sound check. It has been a Herculean effort of all of our partners. We've got 300 volunteers. We've got just the favor of God. So how? By grace. Who? People who know who we are and who trust who we are and need this church to survive so that they can continue to grow in their life. All hands on deck. And those people just came in from all over the world, A pastor today from North Carolina just did something for our church today that I can't even, I cried about it. It's just been amazing. It's just been amazing.
So I hope you don't mind then. Does that touch on then, what do you call it? The Out of the Harbor Fund, the goal that you said you felt God placed on your heart. Was it $2,100 from 2,100 congregants or members in a certain amount of time to go toward not only the repair costs, but you also said you have this vision of perhaps building bigger. Yeah. Is that what it's related to?
Yeah, because what we know, from internally is that when you have an insurance policy, you have two types. You have the replacement cost, but then you have a cash value. And so whenever you have a cash value, then the cash value is based on the depreciation of the asset. So then we knew that we needed to fill in the gap. I know it got a lot of attention, and I know it went viral, and a lot of people are upset about it, and they were frustrated about it. And, my intent in ministry is never to disenfranchise anybody, never to make anybody distrustful of me as a minister or the church. And so that was, it was an unfortunate misunderstanding, and probably some tone deafness on my own part, because, I grew up in church. You can do that in church. The people in church get it. I realized one day that I was no longer talking to the church. I realized that everything I said now had consequences because people were trusting me as their online minister, or perhaps as a different shade of the preacher of old. And so I understood that when the heat came. I understand that now. And believe me, I don't walk through any circumstance with arrogance or pride. I'm not the kind of person, who are they to say something to me? No, I learned from my friends and my enemies. And all that did was make me a better leader. That's all it did. So I'm grateful for the experience, no matter how it shook down, because I become a better leader as a result of it.
And so another related question, speaking of scandal, right? We're going to go back just a couple of months, that viral video that you got a lot of criticism for. You did address it on the Tamron Hall show. And so I'm personally curious because, as I was reading the book, you're talking about relationships and love and these different types of love we have to position ourselves for. So I was curious. It came to me. Is that woman, I believe the choir member, is she still there at the Lighthouse Church? Did you two speak? I don't know if reconcile is the right word, but you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. She was there the next Sunday. So what took place online, very unfortunate. Again, 30 seconds out of a 2-hour service. And as I've said what I said about it in the past, you saw the Tamron Hall show, so I don't want to give life to something that's already dead. But yes, we've spoken, to our office. to the ministry leaders, just a myriad of different things, and all as well. We haven't had one coarse word about it since then. I think we don't live in a before giving society, but everything internally as well. So, and I just hope everybody else on the outside catches up with us on the inside.
Yeah, that's amazing because, when I guess scandal hits, right? Very rarely do people get the tail end of it, right? And so the lasting image they have in their head is of all this whole negative thing. And
Yeah,
that's just what they run through. So I appreciate you taking a few minutes there just to address that. Thank you.
absolutely. No problem.
So is there anything about Lazy Love or any news with the church, any personal things you're doing in terms of, another book project, maybe an event you're participating, organizing in, anything at all that you'd like to share that we didn't touch on?
Yeah, so Lazy Love, praise God, it was number one new releases. It's doing well right now. And it came out during a time where I think the world needs it. Like, we're so hateful in politics, we're so hateful in genders, we're so hateful in ministry, we're so hateful on television. And what the world needs is love. The Beatles were right. And so I hope that this book penetrates the darkness and just lifts people's spirits. You got to do some work. Like you said earlier, it is easier said than done, but it isn't hard to do if you start doing it.
Hmm.
Confront your demons, confront your tragedies, confront your shortcomings, and just say, you know what? I want to be more loving. And it is amazing that when you become more loving, you get more love in return.